All right. Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to our live comp plan Q&A session with the crew over at Spiff. So let me pull up. I've got a couple of slides that I'm gonna kind of use as a backdrop here to our conversation. Wanted to do first some quick kind of intro overview on what we're ultimately looking to accomplish today. So this is meant to be an interactive session. We've got Courtney and Max from the Spiff team here. They are comp plan and just compensation experts. And so we've got the chat here that we asked you all already to tell us kind of where you're at, and also talk about some pizza choices, some of which are questionable, I'm seeing so far. So as stuff comes up, or if things are on your mind right now that are comp plan related, please drop them into the chat, because we're going to be referencing that as we go along to make sure that we address any questions that ultimately do come up. And like I said, that's the goal today. Is one, we want to hear questions that you have that are comp plan related. We'll get them answered by the experts from Spiff. We've also got a couple of comp plan examples that we're going to do essentially a teardown session on. One's a BDR example, one's an account executive example. And then we've got a lot of other kind of compensation related content and topics that we're going to cover. But without further ado, let me do some quick introductions of the team that we've got here. So we've got Courtney and Max from the Spiff team. Both of them are solutions consultants, and they are, like I said, comp plan experts. And so Courtney, Max, welcome. I do have one extra question for you all, just because I'd like to, kind of make you all think on your feet before we get started here. And Courtney, I'm going to start with you. So Max, I guess you'll have a little bit of time to think of your answer. But I want to know, actually, what's your favorite M&M, flavor, and why?
Mine is by far peanut M&M, and it's not even a question asked. I think why is because I'm a salty guy, and peanuts have salt, and so I think that's the main reason why I like peanut M&Ms. Also, I grew up on them with my dad. I think I inherited that from him, and so I think that has a lot of reason why.
Awesome. All right, Max, what you got?
You're stumping me. Honestly, I can't tell you the last time I had an M&M. So
come on, man.
My favorite M&M is not an M&M.
All right, Max is taking the easy road out here. Well, my favorite M&M is peanut butter. So different than Courtney, I love the peanut butter M&Ms. I don't know why. It's like a tablespoon of like peanut butter and Nutella wrapped into just goodness. So that's my favorite. All right, so thank you guys for entertaining me there. All right, so now that we're through introductions, the first thing that I want to tackle is I want to do kind of comp plan teardown. So you all, obviously comp plan experts over at Spiff. Not only are you building incredible compensation software, but you're also providing a lot of your expertise on incentive compensation to clients, customers, and other folks alike. So I'm sure you've seen probably hundreds of different comp plans for different types of roles at different types of companies. But the two examples that we have here, and really the first one that I want to get into, is the example of a business development rep or a BDR for a growing technology startup. So this is an anonymous comp plan that we have. It's a real life comp plan that we received from someone who works on a team of 5 BDRs, growing technology startup. So the company has raised about $35 million in total and is essentially Series C in terms of stage. When it comes to the role and the comp plan itself, this BDR is comped on, it looks like, demos per month. So it has a quota of 20 demos per month. Their compensation is $100,000 OTE, 70K base, 30K variable. Their average sales price is $60,000, and their average sales cycle is about 120 days. And it looks like they pay out on a monthly basis for this particular comp plan. So I guess Courtney or Max, whichever one of you guys wants to go first, kind of tell me some initial thoughts, reactions, the good, the bad, the ugly, everything in between for this particular plan. And I can kind of pull up this slide if it makes sense, or if you want me to go back to the actual comp plan itself, just let me know.
To kind of involve them in the rest of the business, as well as ensure higher quality leads in the first place. And then finally, just a kind of an anecdotal note here, I find it pretty surprising that the BDR is giving the initial demo. This could indicate that it's a pretty straightforward product, low complexity of sale, but that's also, in my opinion, a little bit counterintuitive considering that they're very clearly playing the volume game. So that kind of is a contradictory way to compensate a BDR, in my opinion. So with that, Courtney, did I miss anything? Any other comments you want to add there?
No, I don't think so. I think you hit it right on the nail. I would also, just the voices as well, as quality leads usually tend to have a higher win rate, right? And so if you are incentivizing your BDRs to, go get quality versus quantity, your AEs are going to most likely close more deals at a higher win rate because of the quality over quantity.
Yeah. So questions for you all. I mean, the first thing you talk about in terms of improvement here is the kind of no criteria for call it qualified deals. I think obviously it's if someone books a demo, right? It's pretty obvious in terms of whether or not that meeting was scheduled, right? But if it's qualified, the first thing that kind of comes to my mind there is, I don't know, judgment starts to come into play, and then is like, well, how qualified, right? Like kind of qualified, like what's the actual criteria? Like I know in my experience, like some of the things that I've tried to do with this, kind of qualified aspect is for SDRs or BDRs compensate based on what I call sales accepted leads, meaning, hey, so you booked a meeting, but did that person meet call it our qualification criteria on paper, right? Were they, a right sort of job title, right level, right sort of, kind of company characteristics, that I'm willing to, call it accept, kind of accept that lead. Not necessarily accept it into my pipeline yet, but at least like accept that lead. That's just one example of how I've, kind of thought about it in the past. But what does the qualified aspect mean to you all? And what are some good examples, maybe in this case, of, what folks could consider for comping their BDR team members?
Yeah, so that's a great question. From what we see the most, we do give the qualification criteria to the account executives themselves. So they are the ones deciding whether or not a lead was in fact qualified. This is actually something we've done a lot of work internally at Spiff here, is coming up with those criteria of what qualified actually means. So a lot of this does depend on the nuance of what product you're selling and what problems you're solving. But there's also some simple criteria that you could put in there. Like maybe they're literally just shopping around, but they're not planning to buy for another 10 months. Why would you clog your pipeline with someone that's totally not ready to make a decision yet? Additionally, I'm sure everyone can get to a point where they have at least some basic criteria to determine whether they're actually a technical fit or not. And along those lines, is the person you're talking to actually someone that can help you drive this sale forward? Or is it, some person lower on the totem pole at the company that's just kind of poking around trying to gather information? So those are some things to consider, and a lot of it does depend on the nuance of your business.
Yeah. And what about, so I guess on that, what about, if you've got qualification criteria here, and regardless, I'll say, of how fuzzy or clear it might be, right? Whether it's like clear as day or clear as mud. What about, as I think about, call it like the review process of like, okay, let's say we have qualification criteria, whoever job it is makes a determination of like, okay, these deals meet this criteria, we're comping you based on this. What are things that people should consider on the review side for how to look back and actually evaluate that, or make sure that you've got maybe the right approvals or things in place that you're actually evaluating your qualification criteria correctly?
Yeah, I guess the way I'll answer that is kind of segueing a little bit and say that, the AE is just as enthusiastic about getting a qualified lead into their pipeline. So I don't think you should have much concern about getting through that qualification process. The AE is incentivized to have that pipeline and drive the deal forward. So I do actually think that the BDR and the AE's interests are aligned there. Additionally, if there are any concerns about being able to effectively qualify, in that case, I would recommend a mix, right? You can do a balance between incentivizing the volume game, just meetings taken, and then another piece of their comp could be qualified leads. So it doesn't have to be an all or nothing situation. It can definitely be a mix to make sure that you're incentivizing the right behavior.
Yep. And then it looks like some people are bringing up too, as we talk about, like, one of the other items here is, call it kind of bonuses or maybe extra compensation on deals that were sourced by a particular BDR or SDR that ultimately move on to closed won. And I know I see you mentioned highly recommending this. I think some questions from the audience are like, well, why is that maybe a strong recommendation for you? Are there some other ways to incentivize the quality over quantity? And then the other question that's interesting is actually why should there be additional comp on getting a deal to closed won when it's something for the BDR who's sourcing the demo, but closing that deal is kind of outside of their control, right? Like, that's the job of the account executive. So yeah, whether Courtney or Max, what's your feedback on that when it comes to the actual spiff for kind of moving folks to closed won and just the alignment or maybe misalignment there?
Yeah, so that's another great question. So first and foremost, I would say that that's not going to be a large portion of their compensation. It's essentially kind of like that extra cherry on top. The other thing is that is a way of incentivizing higher quality leads and just more prep work up front from the BDR team. And then finally, we all know sales is a team effort. It's not on any one person. And in my opinion, this very much encourages better collaboration between the AE and their entire support team around them within the deal, starting with the BDR, moving to sales engineers or solutions consultants, and anyone else that might have their hands on the deal. If everyone kind of has a stake in the game there with the closed won aspect of it, even if it's not necessarily their direct job, I think it does encourage the kind of collaboration that will help move the company forward.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I would agree with that too. I mean, most of the time when you are collaborating and bringing more people onto a deal, win rates usually go higher. And so when you incentivize, BDRs, SDRs to find those quality leads, like what Max is saying, to really scope it out at the beginning and get those good deals going through to the AEs. And then, like Max said, including the SEs, the solution engineers, the architects, et cetera, it's just going to help your business grow and continue to bring in revenue.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's interesting. I like, you bring up a good point, Courtney, at least for me, like, very data driven, right? Of like, why is it important? I mean, you kind of just said it, right? The more alignment you have, the more people you have driving towards the same goal, the better win rates you get. Kind of pretty obvious if you put it in that light. All right, good. All right, awesome. I guess, Courtney or Max, anything else on the BDR kind of example here that's worth mentioning, or anything that you're seeing from even questions from the audience here that you guys might want to address before we move on to the next comp plan example that we got?
Yeah, I guess just to touch on a few other things that were in here. So other ways to comp on closed won, other than closed won, to incentivize quality. I think there's a lot of ways you could do that. Again, it does kind of depend on the nuance of your business, but some things that come to mind might be like the overall size of the deal, or even things like maybe the contract length that ends up coming through. That's kind of a way of gauging the sincerity of the prospect. And then another one that was in here, looking at potentially the count of the deals closed, not necessarily just comping per deal closed, but maybe if they get 5 deals closed won by the end of the year, they get an extra bonus. I think that's a great way to do it. Some things to consider though will be, what does your sales cycle look like? If you're in super long, drawn out enterprise sales cycles where an AE closes 1 to 3 deals a year, it's going to be pretty hard to play the quantity game there.
Yep. Yeah, that makes sense. And actually, I guess I've got some questions on the consistency aspect there. Maybe I'll hold those till this next one that we've got. All right, good. All right, so let's. All right, so we talked about call it top of funnel, kind of BDR, SDR sort of role. Let's move on to an actual account executive role. So in this case, the job title, mid-market account executive. We've got a theme going here, growing technology startup. Also a team of 5 AEs. This company has raised $25 million. It has about 100 total employees. Revenue range somewhere in the $1 to $5 million of total ARR, but growing. And when it comes to the role and the actual comp plan, in this case, the account executive is only responsible for selling, so they're not a full cycle. They're not a full cycle rep, meaning they don't do kind of prospecting. They close business. Their annual quota is $720,000. Average sales price of $15,000. Average sales cycle of 30 days. And OTE is 150K. That's 50-50 split. So it looks like 75K base, 75K variable. And similar to the last plan we looked at, this plan has monthly payouts as well. All right, so Courtney, Max, tell us, what looks good, what could be improved for this particular AE comp plan.
Yeah, absolutely. So the things that we went over and saw that looked good was the payout frequency aligns with average sales cycle length. The uncapped accelerators is ideal. This is a really good incentive to help motivate your reps so that they don't stop selling after they hit quota. And then good deal kickers, new logo, multi-year, things like that. These are always good practices to help incentivize, keeping those contracts longer. Helps you to maintain that revenue. And usually year 2, year 3, you're making more money off of those deals. And then things to improve. There was no renewal component within this. So no, you're not incentivizing your AEs to renew deals. And so that's something that we usually see across the board with customers. And so that's one thing to note. And then longer sales cycle, which therefore maybe larger size deals are disincentivized due to how much volume is required. And then no large deal bonus. So what I mean by that is, if you get a deal that's over, 100K, 200K, et cetera, really incentivizing those reps on getting those larger deals. So that's another piece that should be improved within this comp plan. And then no longer term year-end bonuses. And so these are the things that we saw going through this. I think there was a lot of good. And then I think these are the things that could be improved on. I think really incentivizing for those, renewals, larger deals. These are simple things that you can do that's just going to help bring in more revenue.
Yeah. So on the, I guess question on the renewal side is when you mention comping based on renewals, your account executive, is that similar to what we mentioned before about, call it sales being a team sport, right? And so you want to provide, additional compensation for bringing on customers with longevity, right? That'll stick around, that will renew, that are going to be like the clearly good fit. Is that call it the primary kind of purpose of that recommendation. Because when I think of comping based on renewal, I'm like, oh, well, that's the customer success team's job, right? Like that's account management's job to make sure the customers are successful, to get them to renewal. And so it's kind of like the BDR example before of providing some additional comp based on deals that get to closed won, of like, you know, the AE might be in that case, like they're the one who call it source the customer, right? But it's the customer success manager's job to make them successful, manage that relationship, get them to renewal, and then get them past renewal. So I guess just those are some of my initial thoughts. Like what feedback do you have there?
Yeah, I'll go first then, Max, if you want to go. I think you make a lot of sense when it comes to like the CSMs handling a lot of these renewals, right? However, once again, it's a team game. And so what we see across, comp is usually we're incentivizing both. Usually it's, the rate that they're getting is much smaller for these renewals, but it's still a way of saying, hey, let's keep these deals. Let's keep them from churning. What can the AE do? A lot of times too, these people that these AEs are working with still reach out to them. They're still keeping in communication. And so they're helping keep them on your platform within your business. And so we want to, if that's going to help them keep them there, why not incentivize for that?
Yeah. And just to add on top of that, I think a phrase we want to avoid in this space is that's someone else's job, right? Mm-hmm. I don't think we want to limit the number of ways that you're incentivizing people. At the end of the day, if they're bringing revenue into the company, especially if, they're meeting their quota on new business and also bringing in renewals, why wouldn't you comp them on that?
Yeah. No, and it makes complete sense, especially like if you compare it back to the thing we were just talking about when it comes to BDRs, SDRs, and the relationship with account executives. Is like you want folks to think about quality, not just quantity. And you obviously, like, everyone wants to do what's best for the business, which is bring customers in, make them successful, keep them. So, why wouldn't you want to incentivize a BDR to make sure they're bringing the right people to the table and handing off the right people to their account executives? The same thing goes for any account executive of like, why would you not want to incentivize those folks to bring the right customers to the table, get them over the finish line and kind of hand them off to the customer success team, makes complete sense. And actually, I guess one of the things that was asked before about not only the BDR and SDR role, but the I think also could be relevant for the account executive role is, I'll say, like the difference between source, like kind of inbound versus outbound. Do you all have any thoughts on whether it's the BDR role or the AE role that we're looking at now? Like, should companies consider splitting, call it quota and the way they compensate people based on channel, like based on inbound versus outbound? What are some things that people should consider on like pros, cons, the reasons to do something like that, not to do something like that? What have you all seen in working with, obviously, tons of different, kind of companies?
Yeah, I'll go first. So if an AE is finding their own deals, which, bringing it in, I think you should absolutely incentivize for that. I think that motivates the AEs to not only, get inbound deals, but go outbound and get their own deals as well. It's just, once again, you're incentivizing for them helping create revenue. And if they're finding those deals, you should definitely incentivize. It's going to help them to make sure they continue to go outbound versus just, just getting everything inbound. So that really helps them to continue to work, even if they don't have, maybe their schedule isn't that busy. They can take those hours and outbound and find their deals. And I definitely incentivize for that.
Yeah, that makes sense. So I guess in this case, right, we talked about this particular role with the mid-market AE role that we're looking at here. This specifically was someone who had no prospecting as part of their role, right? So it kind of made sense the way the comp plan was set up, that, hey, we're not going to obviously provide any sort of different incentives for channel, right, inbound versus outbound, because your job is to just take what you're given, or take what the your SDR BDR team kind of sources for you. That makes sense. And actually, I can tell you, speaking from example too, Courtney, the piece you just brought up is actually is very important. So in my past experience, it wasn't inbound versus outbound, but it was actually for us, it was new business versus expansion revenue. So in my experience, I was leading business operations at a growing technology startup. Net revenue retention, net dollar retention was very important to us in terms of as a company raising more money. And so we always had expansion revenue targets every single quarter. And we told our account executives that it was their job to go out and drive expansion revenue, but we didn't compensate them differently on expansion revenue versus new business. They just had one number. They were comped based on that number, and however they got there was however they got there. And so guess what the account executives did is they got a bunch of new business, which is great, right? They would hit their numbers that way. But for us, we really wanted them to hit their expansion revenue numbers as well, because that was important to us for fundraising and all these other things. So yeah, it makes complete sense. Kind of align the incentives with the actions, the outcomes that you want to drive, and that'll ensure that you kind of get there. All right. Let's see. So actually, getting some questions on. Let's see. Should 18? Oh, actually, yeah. This is a good one. So we've talked about individuals, right? You're a BDR. You're an account executive. What if you're in a leadership sort of role? Let's say you're leading a team of SDRs. You're leading a team of mid-market account executives, like you see here. What are some compensation best practices for consideration for folks like that who may not carry an individual number, or maybe part of their job is to carry an individual number, but they've also got to manage the rest of the team? What are some things that people can consider there?
Yeah, I think that it really depends, once again, like your business process and what their role is doing. Because I think you can definitely separate it out into two. If they are getting their own deals and closing their own deals, you can definitely give them their own individual quota, and have that be a separate component compared to their team quota that they have as well. I think that if your business process is aligned that way, where they're closing their own deals, you should definitely have a quota for them.
Yeah. And I'll add on to that. It's not super common, at least in what I've seen, to have a team leader carry their own quota. I think in some ways that can kind of create misalignment of objectives, right? A lot of times the team leader then is going to be a little bit more selfish in their actions. When in my opinion, I think the best way to make sure that the team lead is doing their job of encouraging and leading their team, joining their sales calls, things like that, you don't really want to add anything extra on top of that beyond just them ensuring that their team hits their quota. In my opinion, that's the purpose of a sales leader. But again, like Courtney said, that can definitely depend on the nuance of your business.
Yep. And that makes sense. I guess I'll give another example. There was this from my past too, same company that I was working at before. There was this transitionary period that we were going through as we were growing from having a VP of sales who was an individual contributor and kind of managing the team, but held a number. And that was how this person was getting compensated. And we were in this transitionary period of moving to a team-based quota and kind of taking the individual number away, but it took us a little bit of time to get there. And yeah, you definitely saw it in terms of call it the actions that this person was taking. Again, when 50% of your compensation is going to be tied to variable or outcomes, right? Like you're going to do the things you need to hit those numbers. And so it makes sense that you'd want to align the comp with the actions that you want. But I guess on that note, so right, if you talk about like the comp plan we just showed, $750K or $720K, I think was the quota that assumes 100% performance. So now let's say that I'm the VP of sales for 5 of those people. Is my number 5 times 720K, or is there any buffer kind of based into my number for the variability of just team performance? And should everything in, say, my number as a leader be aligned with the things we comp the individuals at. For example, monthly payouts, monthly calculations, all things like that. Like, should there be any differences, as you go from like individual to team? And if so, what are the things to think through there?
Somewhere on your quota design as well as your headcount. It's unrealistic to think that your entire team is all going to hit 100% of quota. So obviously that's the dream state, but that's not the reality of how you go about designing your territories, designing your quota values, and also, planning for headcount. So I do think it's essential to have some buffer in there. Another way to think about this, though, is rather than having a manager have a separate quota that is for individual purposes, this can be how you account for that, right? To where they can have a little bit more say in their own fate if some of that buffer comes from their own duties. So, excuse me, it is still just a roll up of all their team's quota, but some of that, the expectation would be comes from them individually as well.
Mm-hmm. So, I guess to push back on that a little bit, Max, like, I don't know, I'm thinking, so I guess your recommendation is to say like, hey, as a team leader, I might give you like a number or a target that we need to hit in terms of new business that's closed. Whether we need 3 people or 13 people to get there, like how we get there, I'll say is up to you as a team leader, which is why just doing the simple roll up of 5 times 700 and whatever K wouldn't be the right way to go. Am I thinking of that correctly? Because then the other aspect of me is I'm like, well, hey, if I'm an account executive, like you're not giving me any buffer, my 720K is my number. Like, why wouldn't you just roll it up for the person, for the guy or gal who's leading the team, right? Like, why do they get a break, but not me?
Yeah, I guess my counter to that would be if every member of your team hits 100% of quota, then that implies there's more dollars out there to be had, right?
Yeah. What is the ideal percentage in terms of quota achievement, or maybe just a range that people could expect at the individual level?
That's a great question. So that is a data point that I don't have at my fingertips right now, but that's definitely something that we could access. This is a lot of work we're actually doing with Spiff in terms of having those benchmark data points. So don't have a number for you right now.
Okay. All right, good. All right. Well, I guess since we kind of went from BDR, SDR, account executive, we talked about leadership, comp plan, kind of building examples. I've got up, some best practices here on the screen. What else would you guys like to mention in terms of just like best practices, maybe that when it comes to comp plans that we haven't talked about yet, that you want to make sure we hit on?
I think that going to like Brayton's question in the chat, where he's talking about how can we this will align. Any suggestions about how a company can successfully transition to a solution like Spiff? This is exactly how coming to Spiff is going to allow you to be able to design your plans if you need a redesign, or use your current design and be able to give visibility to your reps. And so thinking about how to make sure your reps are understanding how they're being paid out is probably the most important thing that you want to do. And so making sure that you have those accelerators that we talked about, uncapped, things like that, right? But also giving them the visibility so they understand exactly how they're being paid out and how you can motivate them to close that next deal. And so to answer Brenton's question is really, if you come to Spiff or a tool like Spiff and you automate it and give your reps that visibility that they need, I think that you'll notice that your reps will be much happier, and the ROI behind that is just gonna be beneficial for them. And so by setting up the plans in a way where your reps understand it, where it's more readable, they're simple, but they can still be complex, where you can pay out where it makes the most sense for your business, are important things. So running spiffs, running leaderboards, running, incentives by month, by quarter, by year, are things that you can do as a company to help bring in, more revenue and motivate your reps. And these are things that are easily handled within a tool like Spiff to incentivize and show your reps visibility.
Yeah. So Cindy asked a question actually related to one of the things on here. We talked about kind of running spiffs for top AEs and BDRs. I think some of her questions are like, in terms of like, call it dollars, like, is that X dollars if you're, say, a top performer? And is that X dollars if you're a top performer at the end of the quarter, at the end of the month, at the end of the year? Like, what are the considerations for comping the folks that land at the top of the leaderboard, for example?
Yeah. So could be either or, fixed or rate. Seen it both, and both work well. I think it depends on what the type of spiff, right? So if we're saying, hey, for this month, we want to close this product, and whoever closes this product gets this fixed amount. If we're saying, hey, whoever closes the most ARR for the year, let's give a percentage or a rate for that. And so I think it really depends on the type of spiff or the type of bonus you're wanting to pay them out, which will determine if it's a fixed amount or a rate.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I'll add on to that. I think with spiffs, you want to use those for super short-term, high velocity things that change throughout the cycle of a year, let's say. So, maybe for whatever reason, you're slipping one quarter. And so you want to encourage your reps to kind of get deals in the door faster rather than waiting till that last week of the quarter. That's a good time you might want to run a spiff. Or, maybe you're having some kind of special on a product that you sell, and that's for a short period of time. Another great time to run a spiff. I'd also say that spiffs generally, I think, should be a fixed dollar amount because of the nature of them. They're super high velocity, short term. You don't want the rep to have to do too much thinking about that, right? It's just like, I do this, I get this many dollars, right? If it's more attainment based or some kind of percentage, that makes it a little bit more challenging to wrap your head around, and that slows things down. For things like, top AE or BDR of the quarter, I think those would not really fit into the realm of a spiff, but more something as part of their actual compensation structure. Again, that could be just a flat bonus, like Courtney was saying, or a percentage, but those are more of like an official thing in the comp plan that is always there, whereas a spiff is short-term, constantly moving around.
Mm-hmm. And what about one of the things you mentioned got me thinking, again, like the the things we've been talking about today are, I'll say known numbers, known amounts, right? Like, we booked 20 demos. I closed a 30K ARR deal. What about the folks that may not have the actual known revenue amount up front, right? Maybe they've got usage-based pricing. Maybe there's, variable pricing, but at least contractually, the terms are set, but the true dollar amount may not be known, and, could even be, a pretty big range. What are some best practices or considerations for companies, that have products like that?
Yeah, so I can start with this one because this is actually super salient for me. I've worked with a couple customers in the last few months that have this model. What I think works the best here is still being able to compensate upfront as much as possible, fully recognizing that things are going to change. So it's really important to find that balance, and it is definitely a fine line between paying the rep enough upfront, incentivizing them, in the shorter term, without having too much complication on the back end of that. So what I have seen there is, depending on the contract length, like if it's an annual deal that, has a higher chance of that revenue actually coming in, they'll pay that up front. If it's a much shorter term deal that, is kind of like on a month to month pay cycle, they'll be a little more stringent on that because it is a higher risk deal. But again, they're still kind of comping in the near term as best as possible, and then having some kind of reconciliation on the back end. The overarching thing here, though, that I think is crucial is transparency. A usage-based model can be super hard for a rep to follow and really know what dollars are coming in when. So unless you have the ability to present front and center them, like at a line item detail, deal by deal, what their commissions are, then you're going to have a lot of disputes, a lot of confusion around why they're being comped, what might be missing, all those scenarios that lead to headaches for comp admins.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And actually, one follow-up question on that before we get to some of the things the audience is asking about here, because you got me thinking about what you mentioned here on the slide, right? Deceleration, but also kind of clawbacks. So let's just take the example of a monthly subscription versus an annual subscription, right? In the past, I've personally kind of seen companies say, hey, well, if you sell a monthly subscription, maybe we'll pay out based on the annual contract amount. But if that person churns before month 3 or month 6, right, like we're going to do a clawback. So how should folks be thinking about clawbacks or deceleration in their comp plan, whether it's related to say some of these unknowns like you mentioned, Max, of usage, variable pricing, different products, things like that, or not. Are those good, bad? What should folks be considering on that topic?
I can go first. Yeah, so I think with clawbacks, that's inevitable. I think it's more of a business process as far as like, why did they churn? Why are we clawing back, and making sure that the process there is in a good state? Because oftentimes what will happen is if you claw back something, you're gonna have the AE asking questions why. And so when it comes to clawbacks, it's gonna happen. You're gonna have those certain things that just occur, but it's really understanding when should we do a clawback? Should we do it within 3 months, 6 months? What makes most sense for business when it comes to usage models? That's going to be, you're going to have a little bit more frequently churn or clawbacks. And so it depends on the type of business, whether it's usage or if it's annual type attainment. So if it's annual, you're going to have churn that's probably within the year or the following year, if it's a multi-year deal. And then obviously if it's usage-based, it's going to be more frequent. And then as far as deceleration goes, it's a bad way to motivate your reps if you're decelerating their rate based off the deals that they bring in. And so that's something that you should try to avoid or decrease as much as possible, because it's not going to motivate your reps.
Yeah.
And just a few more comments on the clawbacks. Like Courtney said, they're going to happen. They're inevitable. I think the key there is really just honesty and transparency. And then don't be so afraid of clawbacks that you change your business model to only comping once revenue is received, right? Mm-hmm. I understand there's some cash flow considerations, and a lot of that depends on the maturity of your organization. But as much as possible, best practice is to comp when a deal is booked. That keeps the momentum, that keeps the excitement for the rep. And then just be clear and transparent when clawbacks do happen. Don't change your process to just always wait until the money is in the bank.
Yep. And so talked a lot about transparency and kind of just being upfront with everyone, right? Whether it's a BDR, an account executive, whoever it might be. So one of the questions here from Grayson is, call it communication and calculation of any sort of comp plans. Who owns that? And kind of what are some best practices, or what should the process be to make sure that things are communicated correctly, that there is that transparency up front, that folks don't come back after something's been paid out and are like, well, you didn't tell me about that, or I didn't know. What are best practices there? Who owns stuff like that? Is that called a VP of sales job, or like the team lead job? Is that someone in RevOps, sales ops? Is that finance? Is that somewhere else? What are some best practices there around communicating and being transparent? And then also call it the nuts and bolts, the nitty gritty of the actual calculations. Where should that responsibility lie to?
Yeah, so the nitty gritty, the nuts and bolts, the calculation, that should, again, be super upfront and transparent with the rep so that they are seeing it, they're understanding why. I would be inclined to put that on the plate of more of like comp admins or sales ops or the RevOps team, rather than the VP of sales or any sales leadership. The last thing we want is creating any animosity between salespeople on the ground and their direct sales leadership. So when you're having too much of, the onus being put on the sales leaders, that can create a negative environment, which I don't think we want. So unfortunately, I'm putting this on the comp admins or other teams to kind of be the bad guy there, but I think that's the best way to go about it.
Mm-hmm. And actually, so some other, I guess, some follow-up questions here. I'll say one is on the one's on the front end of, say, new hires that might be BDRs, SDRs, AEs, and then one will be on the back end. So on the front end, you hire a new account executive, you hire a new BDR. What are considerations around ramp periods? How much time to give someone to ramp? And then how should folks be thinking about recoverable versus non-recoverable draws during that ramp period as well?
Yeah, I can go here first. So ramp really depends on the complexity of the product that you're selling. It also depends on, I would really take the data and see how your new reps are performing, right? And take that data and you can change the ramp each year depending on how they're performing. Typically we say 3 to 6 months for ramping. And during those ramps, it usually changes. Like month 1 is, 20%, month 2, 40%. I'm just throwing out percentages there. But it's a good way of measuring and getting your people ramped up in a higher, faster rate. And so it really depends on those things: product complexity, sales cycle, how long deals usually take in the cycle. So that I would take those things into consideration to really determine what the ramp should be. And then as far as recoverable, non-recoverable, I think in my opinion, it's better practice for non-recoverable draws. I think it's going to help motivate those reps and not be scared of something that they maybe did during ramping, and that's a time for them to learn and be motivated and be excited about the product. And so, doing recoverable draws usually can cause contention.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And then Max, you mentioned some of this on the in your last comment about like comping when a deal is closed, right? Not necessarily when you first get paid or when some other call it milestone is reached. So what? I mean, this sounds, I don't want to say like obvious or like a basic question, but I've also, I know I've heard so many different definitions myself of like what determines a deal being closed. Like, what is the definition of a deal getting marked as closed won, and can that actually differ based on call it company to company? Like, what are best practices or considerations there as it relates to comp?
Yeah, so it definitely can differ. However, I'd say let's not over-engineer this. Keep it as simple as possible. If the signature is received and you're marking it as closed won in your CRM, it's time to comp on that deal. If you have a super convoluted process between that and when you're actually going to comp, there's all these boxes to tick, that's just going to create frustration for your reps, and it's going to really slow down your comp admin team while they're dealing with all of those questions from the team. So let's keep it simple. Again, fully acknowledging that there might be some differences with your business specifically, but I think it's a really clean flow for the rep from their perspective. If they go mark that deal as closed won, and then they're going to see that on their comp statement right away.
Yep. And let's see, we're coming into the last 10 minutes here. So everyone out there, definitely keep dropping any questions that you have. I know one of the things that I've heard from some people recently, especially given the kind of the changes in call it the macroeconomic kind of climate and conditions, is like, should we adjust our comp plans at all? Whether that's adjusting quota, whether that's adjusting frequency of payouts, whether that's adjusting the rate of payouts, whatever it might be. What's your guys' opinion on that in terms of like, is that something that should be on the table? If so, how should a company be thinking about that or considering that?
Yeah, I can take that first, Max. I think when I answer this question, I think we'll also answer Lauren Carbone's question as well about best practices to review comp. To first answer the question as far as economic, I think absolutely you should. As a business, it's probably a smart thing to think about economic. We just went through a pandemic, still in it. And so companies are affected that way. And so the best way that we've seen through that pandemic was monthly quotas, because you are able to fluctuate monthly quotas. If you do an annual quota, it's really hard for you to fluctuate and change that quota during the year. And so monthly quotas lets you adapt to really accommodate pandemics, economic situations, to really fluctuate and make sure it's good for both you, the reps, and the business. And then to answer Lauren's question on that as well, as far as reviewing comp plans, this also goes in line with like a Spiff tool where you're able to model your comp plans. And so, for example, like a Spiff tool, you're able to create maybe future plans and test them with real life data to see how they're going to perform and how it's going to compensate your reps to see if it makes sense. So you're able to make more strategic decisions. And so really modeling is a big thing there. You could also model things for like economic downturns, pandemics, to really test it out to see like, if this is going to happen in 6 months, let's really test this out now to see what decisions we need to make.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and just to add on to the last bit there with Isabella's question, the thing I'll say there is, did your company adjust its target overall? If so, and you haven't reduced your quotas, that's going to be incredibly demotivating to your reps. So there is a balance to find there. You don't want to reduce quotas too aggressively and allow your reps to kind of take the foot off the gas, if you will. But at the same time, you have to be realistic, and you do have to make some assessments there to make sure that your reps are still feeling like their quota is achievable. So I think the key here is comp is an always evolving process, right? It's important to always be looking at it and making those changes as needed. But the key there is, don't just make changes blindly. You really need the data to back up the decisions that you're making.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, the things that I'm taking away, from a lot of what you, Max, and Courtney have mentioned so far, one, tying things back to the business, right? Like Max, like you just said, did your business targets change? If so, individual team targets probably should as well. What's the what are the business reasons or the business impact that you're trying to drive with your sales team, your AEs, your SDRs, and how can you align your compensation plans with that, right? It's not the other way around, and it's not just blindly incentivizing or compensating someone for the sake of incentivizing or compensating them, right? So really clearly tying things back to the business. And then I think the thing, Courtney, that you mentioned that I really liked on that is the flexibility piece as well, right? If you move to, previously you had set annual targets and that was someone's number, right? If you move to something like quarterly or monthly, you're changing the frequency, and that in turn gives you the flexibility to change the number if you need to change the number, right? But you don't have to. So if you build in things like that, and I think if you look at your team of account executives, think of how something like that would be received, right? If on one hand you're like, hey everybody, we're changing your quota, to hey everybody, we're going to move from annual to quarterly quotas now. Quota for the next quarter is this. And maybe that's the same as what it would be if you took their annual number and divided it by 4. You can accomplish the same thing, but very, very different, I think, in terms of how it would be received by the team. So those are 2 big takeaways I took away from some of the things that you guys just mentioned. All right, so we are in the last kind of three minutes. I know we've got some other kind of questions kind of out here, and I think we'll certainly be able to take anything that we haven't answered and probably answer them in the RevOps Co-op kind of Slack group, and then 2, I know the Spiff team is going to be kind of following up with registrants and attendees too. So I guess Courtney, Max, in the last couple of minutes we have, any closing remarks, things that you guys want to make sure the audience kind of walks away with, and then also just what they might kind of expect in terms of kind of hearing from y'all afterwards too?
Yeah. I think that this has been a really good session for us to talk about comp plans. And I think that as you go back to your business, it's really understanding your process today and making changes, or really thinking about how you can simplify things in a way where it makes sense to motivate your reps. That's ultimately going to bring in more revenue for you. And so all the things that we talked about, accelerators, making visible, transparency, clawbacks, all those things you have to take into account. But if you make it more straightforward, I think at the end of the day, it's going to make sure and ensure that your reps are most motivated.
Yeah, and just to add on to that, I think transparency is key, like we continually touched on, as well as making sure that you're finding the best way to motivate, and the way you do that is with data-informed decisions, right? You don't just want to be taking complete stabs in the dark here. Make sure that you have justification and data backing up the decisions that you do make.
Yeah, it makes sense, and again, makes also another big reason why it makes sense to leverage some sort of kind of compensation solution, a tool like Spiff versus something like a spreadsheet, which would otherwise be very, very cumbersome and complex to try to do all that in. And I speak from painful hours that I've spent trying to do that myself. So, all right, well, that sounds good. Max, Courtney, thank you all for kind of taking the time for kind of shedding some of your comp expertise on us. This was super helpful. Really appreciate it. Everyone who attended, thank you very much as well. We do these all the time, so this won't be the last one. Please attend more of our events. But in the meantime, I'll let everybody go. So we'll see y'all later.